Tēnā koutou katoa, ko ingarangi, ko airana te whapapakaranga mai. Engari, ko whaingaroa engari. Ko karioi, maonga, ko wainui te awa, ko waikeri te moana. He kaptawai au tūroa o eCoast, ko Ed Atkin o. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. That was a pepiha, the customary introduction of the Māori, the indigenous peoples of Aotearoa, New Zealand. My pepiha explains that I have English and Irish heritage, but I now call Whaingaroa home. That's Raglan in New Zealand on the west coast. It describes components of the water cycle as well as your lineage. And I described what parts of the water cycle are significant to me, including the mountain, maunga, river, awa, and ocean, waikeri, moana. It also tells you I'm an environmental scientist, but I'm not Māori. Like I said, I grew up in England. But I include it because it highlights the importance of the natural environment in Aotearoa, where environmental management framework acknowledges and incorporates Māori knowledge, customary rights, and alongside that, it values natural resources against economic benefit. As an environmental scientist, a conservationist, and as a surfer, I feel extremely lucky to live where I live in New Zealand. And today I'm going to share some of the projects I get to work on, but also how I got there. I'm going to share my journey, how I was surf-hijacked. Firstly, I'd like to thank Afonso. I can't see Afonso, but I'd like to thank him for inviting me to come and speak. It's a great privilege to be here in Portugal. I first came here 20 years ago on the very first holiday with my partner, Ash. So this place is a very special place for me. And I'd like to thank João Castro as well, the Porto pirate. He was the one that nominated me to come and speak here. I'll also apologize to Afonso because I probably will go over in time. First slide. This is where my office is on the west coast of New Zealand in Raglan. We have 3 very high-quality surf breaks right in front of the office. They're surf breaks of national significance. That means they have the highest level of protection in New Zealand under the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement. This document provides guidance on how to manage our coasts. And it's the only compulsory policy under New Zealand law, under the Resource Management Act. Regional councils, authorities, they have to follow it. And surf breaks are specific in it. In 2010, they identified 17 surf breaks of national significance, the best surf breaks in the country. At that time, they considered them to be anyway. And there's lots of other policies that mention surf breaks as natural resources that we have to protect and preserve. And I said, this is my office. I run a company called eCoast. And we deal with coastal environmental management, climate change and sea level rise, coastal hazards. But I specialize in surf science and surfing resource management. And in a country where we have policy that safeguards surf breaks, that's a real thing. Maybe not everywhere, but it's a real thing in New Zealand. And the reason why I mention my company, and it's not because it's an advert for my company, but I believe as a surfer, it really drives the direction in the way that we go about our jobs. We're always looking to better the environment, not just create a solution. It's about leveraging key stakeholders and working with the environment rather than against it. Basically, invest more time, understand the environment, work out where the problem is and stop applying Band-Aids and solve it properly. Commercially, we find ourselves in tricky positions. We often tell clients what they don't want to hear. We're often viewed as tree huggers, loving the trees. And we consistently support David when he's fighting Goliath, and whether that's to do with environmental injustice or technical incompetence. But we like the fight. We like the good fight. And we provide technical advice to the Surf Break Protection Society in New Zealand, which is similar to Salva Mal Surf here in Portugal. Save the Waves, Surf Rider Foundation, Global Legal Aid Network, and we support them whenever our services are required. My background is in marine engineering, marine science, and oceanography, and it lends itself to addressing problems around surf breaks and managing problems around surf breaks quite well. I've been studying surf science for over 20 years and applying that in a resource management way for about 15 years. And today I'm going to share some of those case studies. But before I do, I'm going to share how I got there, where I came from. And I'm not doing this because I want a pat on the back or I think I did well or it's unique or special. Not at all. What I think is, I believe that surfing hijacked my life and my mind, essentially. Surfing instills a sense of responsibility for the environment. The Māori term for that is kaitiakitanga. It's guardianship. As surfers, we adopt a sustainability consciousness, and that's gained through exposure because we spend more time immersed in our environment. We are in our environment for prolonged periods of time. It's a highly dynamic and sensitive theater, and I believe that changes our mindset, the way we look at things. But I grew up in Worcestershire, in the middle of England, in a little village called Himbleton. Worcestershire is more famous for its sauce and cricket. This is the house I grew up in. My aspirations were to play professional rugby or cricket, one or the other. It's called the Midlands, literally the middle of the country. We call it the Shire because everyone looks like Bilbo here. The closest wave is the Severn Bore, a tidal bore. It's a long time between sets. But my parents always made sure I had a coastal holiday, and they started in Dorset. Is this working? No. Up here, Dorset, on the south coast of England, in the English Channel. And we'd get one of those polystyrene bodyboards, which I'm utterly ashamed of owning now. It would last all of 2 weeks, and then we'd throw it away. Here's me in Bremsumere at 12 years old, my first experience overseas. By 14, we took a family holiday down to Noha, which is sort of just west of Mundaka. I didn't know that at the time. And I had my little bodyboard there that would last 2 weeks, and I saw and befriended a group of 4 lads that were on surfboards, but they were from Cambridge, which is like Himbleton or Worcestershire in the middle of England, but they were surfers. They were undeniably surfers. They were proud of it. And so after 2 weeks, I convinced myself I was a surfer as well. I spent every day in the water with them. Convencido. I had another one. I love it. Sem duvida. No doubt, I was a surfer. I spent 2 weeks surfing with surfers. That family would go on to take me to Cornwall in the southwest of England every year on holiday with them. And during that time, they eventually moved down there. At 16, I would take the train and camp in the southwest of England and surf all summer. By 17, we were venturing to the Canary Islands. But then at 17, I also got my driver's license. And shortly after, was kicked out of college, where I was studying in Worcestershire. They told me to leave. I started working on a farm and building, but I didn't really know what I was doing. I knew that I loved surfing. And my friend invited me to come down to Cornwall, into Falmouth, and start studying marine science. It was life-changing, really. Living by the sea was incredible. I'm not going to pretend I became a good student. I spent more time driving around chasing waves than anything else. It's what I spent all my student loan on, was fuel. But I was studying about waves. I was studying meteorology, marine science, marine biology, ecology, navigation, maths and physics that were all about the coast. And that was really enjoyable. I was in my 3rd year of chasing waves, but also going to college, when a lecturer showed me a proposal for a multi-purpose reef, an artificial reef in Newquay Bay. the idea that you could combine or take all of the maths and the physics that people have been pushing into your head since a little boy and use it to create waves, for me, was fundamentally life-changing. It changed my entire philosophia. And I started working really hard. That concept was just brilliant, like it was applied. It was everything you'd been taught, I could use it. I did my graduate project on a local reef break. I went out and rudimentarily surveyed the reef, and I built a model, and I put waves over it in the tank and started measuring how the waves were changing, and then classified it. This was my first introduction to really sort of understanding how surf breaks work. And I did really well. I got great grades. So the next step I thought would be go and study at a university, get a proper degree and maybe a master's. But surfing had other ideas. I went traveling instead and whilst I was at college, we spent years going to different places all around the world, through Central America, Australasia, Papua New Guinea, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, more Indonesia, and it was just a travel bug. But what I noticed was a cycle that everyone, and it wasn't just me, it was my friends, it was people I'd speak to whilst traveling, that you would travel and then you'd have to come home and work, and that work might be anything you can do. In the southwest of England, very limited number of jobs. You'd find yourself having to move away from the coast, and I didn't want to move away from the coast, even if it was just to get more money to go traveling. I wanted to live by the sea and stay by the sea and have a job that meant I was staying in the ocean and thinking about waves as well. So I went back to university. We did a stint overseas and decided that if I go back to university, at least I might be able to have a job. This is the National Oceanography Centre in Southampton. It doesn't have any waves. I got in. I was an older guy. I was grandpa on campus. And I think they accepted me because I was quite enthusiastic about getting through it. In my first year, someone suggested, it was Ash's sister, suggested that I take an internship and go and get some experience in industry. And I got accepted to different engineering companies around Southampton and England, but none of it sounded fun. And late one night, I emailed the company who designed the artificial reef for Newquay. And they said, after some negotiation, because I had no funding, I only had 3 months, and they usually want 6 months and funding. They said that I could come again because of my enthusiasm, my willingness to get there. So I spent all my savings on getting to New Zealand, and I worked for this company that became infamous. And we moved over to New Zealand. It was incredible. I was working with the guy that started the multi-purpose reef concept, Dr. Shaw Mead. I was walking into an office where they're all surfers, and they're computer modeling and working on technical studies. It was, again, my mind was just blown. Ash came out, and by the time we left New Zealand, we were convinced that we wanted to move to New Zealand. Artificial surfing reefs doesn't really reflect the nature of the concept. I call them multi-purpose surf reefs. As humans, we've been putting things in the ocean for 10,000 years, whether it be to improve aquaculture or for local biodiversity, for shoreline protection, etc. A multi-purpose reef is just a submerged breakwater, and it's a very common term, submerged breakwater, in coastal engineering. Shaw's PhD thesis is it comprises much of what we know about how waves break and why they break in the way they do at natural surf breaks. But what his work advocated was that if you're going to build something in the ocean and go to all that expense, why don't you add a surf break to it? It wasn't about standalone multi-purpose reefs. It wasn't about those reefs. It was about integrating surf breaks into large coastal structures, marinas, ports, breakwaters, etc. Why not add a surf break? We're 25 years on from that now, and it still hasn't happened. All the effort went into building these single structures that almost entirely all of them failed, associated with being built out of sandbags. There's lots of other things that made them fail, like trust fund investors and egos, but they're all stories for another day. Whilst I was in New Zealand, they started building this multi-purpose reef in Boscombe. Does anyone know where Boscombe is? It's in the English Channel, just down the road from where my surfing odyssey began in Dorset. When I came back from New Zealand for my internship, the company gave me a set of survey equipment. And the deal was if I surveyed the reef and the area around it, then I could use that data for my master's thesis, my dissertation. And so I went and bought myself a 3-meter little boat with my student loan and a little 4 horsepower engine. And every month for every 6 weeks for about 2 years or a year and a half, I went out and I surveyed around the reef, collecting data. I set up a camera monitoring station where I'd stand there in the pouring rain and the wind, filming the waves from the cliff so that I could look at how the waves would peel and break and whether it was modifying the environment in the way that they said it would and comparing it to the shoreline next to it. I also filmed it in the water, filming the shape of the wave. If you think it's cold here in winter, you try the English Channel in February whilst it's snowing. I did really well. I got a first-class honors for my graduation, and I completely and utterly put that down to doing it on a subject that I absolutely love. I loved it. I fell in love with surf science. I just thought that this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And I'd worked so hard, I thought, surely they're going to give me a job. Foot in the door. I'm one-way ticket to New Zealand. I'm coming. So make the phone call. So when can I start? Well, no space. No space for you. And at the time, it felt like falling off a horse at a gallop because I was meant to be there. But what do you do when you fall off a horse? Get back up. So we decided we were going to move to New Zealand anyway. We just didn't have any money. It's the first time and only time I've ever knowingly worked for the oil and gas industry. This is Deepwater Horizon in the Gulf of Mexico, and it went, and I got asked to go and work on the cleanup for it. It was for a third party, so it doesn't seem as bad, but it was for the oil and gas industry. But the money was very good. So before we knew it, we found ourselves in New Zealand. Inside that first year, Ash was pregnant with our eldest daughter, Amber. And I walked into the office and just said, I need a job. I would like a job. No work. So I just worked on surf science and learned more and more. Eventually, they gave me one little piece of work, then another little piece of work, and eventually they just gave me a little desk. The next piece of work, again, just altered my life. Sure, the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement that I showed at the start, he actually wrote some of the wording for that. He's a world leader in surf science, and so they asked him to describe what a surf break is and what needs to be protected. And at that time, he had already been doing a decade of work for the Surf Break Protection Society. And we were working on a project down in Otago in the south of New Zealand for Aramoana and Whariakiaki. There was a big port that wanted to dredge a new channel, and they wanted to put the dredge material on the surf breaks or next to the surf breaks. So all this time, everything that led to this point, I'd been working towards creating waves, new waves, whether it be in a port or a reef or whatever. This new direction of using all of that knowledge to preserve and protect and maintain and manage, it just became so fulfilling, the idea that I could use that knowledge in such a good way. And it became the focus of everything for the next 14 years, or 12 years, 13 years. I ended up leaving the other company under not good situation. Shaw said he was leaving because the company ASR was taken over by people that didn't want to work sustainably. So we left and we started eCoast. That's 13, 14 years ago. And together we've worked on lots of case studies to help different groups around the world, whether it be manage their surf break or fight to save their surf break. And so I'll move on to those case studies now. I better find myself in my notes as well. I've kind of been ad-libbing. As you can see, there's lots of cases with a focus in New Zealand. Some have had good outcomes, some not so good outcomes, or they fade away and they become uncontestable, but generally there's a few good takeaways. I don't know how I'm doing for time. Yes, I'm good for time. Before I start speaking about the cases, though, there's a few things that are fundamental to management of surf breaks. High-quality surf requires two things. It must peel at a surfable rate. It can't be too fast or too slow. And it should have a steep face so that we can generate speed and ideally be plunging so that we can get tube rides or barrels. And both of these things are controlled by the seabed, the shape of the seabed. And so that's the first thing that we need to consider, protect, preserve, and maintain is the seabed. When we talk about peel angle or peel rate, the angle between the unbroken crest of the wave and the line of the white water, it's really talking about the speed. Is it surfable? We can surf, it says here we can surf down to about 27 degrees. I think Gabriel Medina or maybe Felipe Toledo could probably do 25 or maybe even clear 23-degree sections. And when we talk about shape, we don't just talk about whether it's plunging or spilling or fat. We can talk about the shape of the barrel itself, where low vortex ratios are square and intense and heavy, and then as the vortex ratio gets higher, it becomes more almond shape and a bit more manageable for general public. The other thing to consider is the length of the ride, although I find that subjective and it's user-defined, because if you fall off, then the ride is short. But it's very good for establishing baselines. There's other things to consider, not just the seabed where the wave is breaking, but the swell corridor, the area offshore where the waves come in to the beach. These are swell corridors that I made for a location in South Island, New Zealand. And the colored hot areas show the areas that are most important, where we see the most activity that's required for that surf break. So we can't just consider the surf break in the seabed in close. We have to look at it out to here in New Zealand, not here, but in New Zealand, to the red line, the territorial sea, 12 nautical miles away. You can see how it's modified outside of that area. But it's not just out at sea. We have to think about things on land. This is Ahipara in the north of New Zealand. On the northern side of that headland, there is a succession of surf breaks. I'm not going to tell you how many. There's a lot, and they're very good. The wind and the waves, they come from the southwest, and whilst in big storms, you can get the sand moving around the headland that fills in the surf breaks. The bulk of it comes over the land. You would have heard of Bruce's Beauties in South Africa. It used to be comparable to Jeffreys Bay, but they planted that dune system out, and then I think they made it into a housing development, and now there's no sand feeding Bruce's Beauties. The other thing we have to think about is our estuarine environments, our rivers. This is Mundaka, probably one of the most famous river bars in the world, and at one point they dredged the Oka estuary, and it killed the wave for a long time. The WCT dropped the Mundaka from the tour. So we have to be thinking about everything outside the surf break as well. This is the case study I mentioned earlier, the one that sort of changed my idea about what I could do with my skill set. Down in Otago, southern part of New Zealand, this is the entrance to a large commercial harbour, and they wanted to dredge material out of that harbour. Outside of it, there's 3 surf breaks of national significance. Karatani is up the coast a bit. Whariakiake, this one, I once surfed it for 6 hours straight. 600-meter long rides, barrels. This is Karatane, and this is Aramoana. Beautiful, beautiful waves. The project, next generation, 7 million meters cube of material, and they wanted to deposit it in different areas. So this is one spoil ground, this is another spoil ground. There's one offshore, but they didn't want to use it because it costs more money to take it further away. They wanted to increase the volumes going into these areas by between 2 and 6 times. The port's consent application said dumping is good for surfing. And the surf community was divided. Some said, yes, we need the sand. Others said, no, the sand is bad. The Surf Break Protection Society, they submitted against the consent and said, whoa, hang on a minute, this is crazy. We ended up going into caucusing, and there was a development of a working party, so all of the different stakeholders got involved. And the first thing that came out of it was that we need to understand. We don't understand how these surf breaks work. Well, this is in part how we go about understanding them. It's a complex environment. The image on the right is a phase average. You would have seen it from Surf Forecast. Phase average wave climate. The red boxes are the dump grounds, the spoil grounds, and we can see that we're seeing the warm colors are higher, bigger wave heights. And you can see it increasing right through to Aramoana, and then there's a focus going into Whare-Ake-Ake. This is the bathymetry of Aramoana, and this lobe here, so warm colors are shallow and cold colors are deep. This is an ebb tidal delta, a big lobe of sand, and it coincides with where this wave height starts to come up. And then these are waves coming in to show how the ebb tidal delta is influencing the wave height. What it does is it actually snaps the crests. We call it bifurcation. It breaks the wave crests apart. And that's what creates these A-frames. You have a couple here, Nazare, Supertubos. This is all bifurcation, crest snapping. We call it preconditioning. No one had any idea. Really, the port didn't have any idea how complex this was. We got them to stop. They agreed to cease any dumping and start monitoring, start following what's going on there. Then they were given a 3-year temporary dredge disposal permit so that we could trial and test different ways. So we put a little bit of sand in here, put a little bit of sand in there, monitor it with a camera, monitor it with survey, and start to understand how we're affecting the surf. We had surfers giving reports on how good the surf was, how good the quality was. We found that we can't overfill for Aramoana, and that Haywards is a preconditioning focus, and it needs material. The Haywards site has been used for 200 years. So it's historical, it's old, it's part of the surf break, even though it's 4 kilometers offshore. They eventually got their consent for 20 years, but they had to detail every activity that they do. We had bigger disposal areas, so they weren't putting it all in one spot. And then we had plans to spread it out evenly. They have a monitoring campaign they have to undertake, and that's monitoring the seafloor and the beaches, but also seabed heights. They can't go above a certain threshold because we know that it's going to impact the surf break. And then ongoing monitoring, and almost the most important, all of that data, all of that information has to be shared with everyone and anyone. This is a case of a win-win scenario. The port, we didn't say the port, you could stop. It was, we understand you have to operate, but operate and let's keep the surf as good as possible. This next case is also based in New Zealand. It's Mangamanu in the northern part of the South Island, just north of Kaikoura. It's a right-hand point break. It's a hell of a lot of fun. The backdrop is snow-capped mountains. It's beautiful. In 2016, there was a huge earthquake that disrupted infrastructure, took out railway lines, the roads, closed roads, isolated communities. The response was a state of emergency, and they established an emergency consenting process under a bill, under legislation. And what it meant was that the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, our document that protects surf breaks, no longer mattered. They could do what they wanted. And that's understandable because we needed critical infrastructure. They needed the roads. They need the railway. What they didn't need was a cycleway. Someone thought it would be a good idea to put a cycleway and a car park at Mongamanu. And to do that, they needed to do a reclamation and then front that reclamation with rocks and boulders, a revetment. The Surf Break Protection Society instantly filed for a judicial review. It was the only way we could stop the emergency consent to determine the lawfulness of the fast-track documents. They submitted their consent for that cycleway, their application, 2 days before the deadline. It was being pushed through because the mayor thought it was a good idea. In a judicial review, we're saying this entire legislation is bullshit. We don't believe this is the right way to do it. And that means there's a potential for high court. There was meetings to go to, and it went on all day, and we sat in fancy rooms. There would be me, Shaw, a pro bono lawyer, and people from the Surf Break Protection Society, and then about 12 lawyers on the other side, just arguing all day long. The New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement wasn't relevant, but we still presented our concerns that we needed studies to be undertaken. You just can't build a rock revetment in front of a surf break. It would reduce the surfing wave quality. We don't know how it would affect sediment transport, the sand, the boulders. And we requested that they actually just followed the process. And we requested that they immediately monitor it. With the thought of going to high court, we started our own environmental impact assessment. I took the jet ski down and surveyed the bay, and then these are numerical model outputs of what would happen, well, what happens without the revetment, and then with their design revetment, and then this is the difference, and the result is reflections. It's not rocket science, but they're not surfers. They don't understand. Tony Butt actually published an article in Surfer's Path and used that model output. It was bigger than Mongamanu. He speaks about a lot of stuff. The mediation outcome eventually is they gave up. Once we said the level that we're willing to go to, high court, they gave up. And the consent was not pursued. It was dropped. SBS withdrew the judicial review, and the integrity of the surf rate was saved. How am I doing for time? Oh, my goodness. This is King Island, and the embayment up the top here is Martha Lavinia. King Island is the remnants of the land bridge between Tasmania and Australia. It looks like that. Amazing. Amazing, amazing waves with classic A-frame shape. The Southern Ocean is constantly providing swell all the time, just a conveyor belt of storms, one after the other. Here they come in from the southwest, and then they wrap round the island early in the swell. Early in the swell, you end up with like a left-hand point break, and at the end of the swell, you end up with a right-hand point break. But in the middle of that, we end up with the swells crossing over. More great shots. More great shots. That's Dave Rastovich. He loved the place. And it replicates the bifurcation, the crest snapping that I described earlier to create those A-frames, but it's not. The whole island is a disruptive preconditioner. You're getting these wave height gradients because one part of the swell is coming around the south, the other coming from the north, and they're different heights, and they're interacting when they reach Martha Lavinia, creating those classic A-frames. Now, you see this in other places. You may get it here. We have it in New Zealand. It's Central America and California are well known for it, where you have a storm in the North Pacific, swell in the south, and then those two swells come together and it creates those A-frames. You see it right through Central America. But that is a basin scale operation. That's from the North Pacific to the South Pacific. What we're seeing here is the same swell, but meeting on the backside of the island. It has the same spectral signature. It's essentially the same swell. It's a process I've never seen anywhere else. It's an absolute phenomenon. A very, very special place. And so did and that's exactly what the aquaculture company thought as well, Tassal. They wanted to put a salmon farm in just down from Martha Lavinia, a 48 square mile area. 25 fish pens, 54 meters in diameter, and millions and millions and millions of fish. Surfrider Australia established communication with that company very, very quickly, and they got a seat at the table before it went ahead. And they could share their concerns, social, economic, biological, chemical, and physical. And whilst I can comment on all of the others, I focus on the physical. It's really my area of expertise. Their expert said that swell wave energy reduction is small for an individual fish pen. But what about cumulative impacts? You've got 54 of them. No, 25 of them of 54 diameters each. What if your company is granted consent, and then another company gets consent, and another company gets consent? We can't think about managing this environment case by case in isolation. You need to think about the bigger picture. And that's really the government's job. What it will do, though, what we know it will do, is it will start reducing the shortwave periods, that wind chop. Now, people might think, great, cleaner swell. We would take the wind chop from a fetch, so how far the wind will blow, of thousands of kilometers down to 3 kilometers. So how's that going to affect the wave climate? Bearing in mind it's the wave climate that drives our sediment transport, and it's often a combination of short period swells and long period swells that drives our sediment transport. Ultimately, the relationship between fish cages, finfish cages, and waves and currents are not understood anywhere. There's no background evidence anywhere. Because Surfrider has set up that relationship, they've set up the relationship with the proponent, with the aquaculture company, we were able to start saying to them the type of investigation that's going to be required. We need to understand about sediment transport, water quality, landscape, visual, aesthetics, and then how they needed to fill their knowledge gaps, deploying instruments, undertaking surveys, setting up numerical models, but most importantly, a surf break characterization, surf break sensitivity, and a surf break impact assessment. Now, I'm not saying that scared them, the level that we were saying they would need to go to, otherwise it would be contested. I think it's a combination of local resistance. No one there wanted it. No one there wanted it. The media sentiment, the media were all over them, and then the level of investment, how much work they would have to do. They dropped it, and it's not gone ahead. And that comes down to having a seat at the table, having that discussion, not just going crazy and going, no, 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 no. It's about getting the seat at the table and having a discussion. Switch up to the Indian Ocean now. I better go a bit quicker. This is the Maldives. It's Kuduvillingili, but it's also known as chickens. One of the best left-handers in the country. It's a wonderful wave. It's a beautiful wave. And it was a beautiful island as well. It was uninhabited until 5 years ago. Now it's 3 times the size. Actually, now it's probably more like 4 times the size. This company that owns it, they just keep on going. They just keep on making new islands all around it. It's a complete mess. What they did do is set up this rock revetment right in front of the wave. It's so close that even on a low tide, you'll feel reflections off the wall. This is drone footage where I tried to show the waves bouncing back. I surfed it. It's just dangerous now. It's analogous to Jardim do Mar in Madeira. We made a lot of progress. We were having meetings with the Ministry of Tourism, the Ministry for Environment. They were very excited about trying to fix this. We made a plan to show how they could do it, but it was just too difficult for them to shift money towards fixing a surf break. What government's going to shift money to fix a surf break? So we started doing our own work. And we deployed instruments, and we collected bathymetry, we started numerical modeling. It's ongoing, but the reality is this is lost, and it would be an easy fix. Just move it back. Keep your infrastructure, just move it back. But 45 kilometers to the south is Miaru Faru Shark Reef at the end of an extremely long lagoon. people I've spoken to said this is the best wave in the Maldives when it's working. It's known for speed and power and long barrel sections. I'd had a video, but it wasn't working. But it's very, very good. I haven't surfed it yet, though. And I might not get to, because they want to reclaim the entire thing. They want to dredge material and put it on top of the reef, and everything will be protected by rock revetments all the way around. You can see that's the length of the reef. The image on the right, in the middle, is the orange box, and this is the wave down here. And this will all be revetment. It's a 1,200 hectare reclamation, and it's very similar to Kuta Vilangili. It's very similar to Jardim de Mar. It's kind of unnecessary. They could easily make a modification. My job is the first part is to show them why it's so important. We talked about peel angle earlier on. I use Google Earth every single day, every day. It's the most powerful tool for a coastal scientist. These are historical aerial images, and I've measured peel angles on them. The peel angles are very conducive to surfing. 48.8 degrees. I mean, everyone's enjoying that. It's quite quick, but it's about right. The standard deviation of those peel angles, so these angles here, is 6 degrees. This indicates a very consistent surf break, highly predictable. We call it mechanical. The value of this is insane. They just don't occur everywhere. We also looked at the wave shape, taking images from snapshots I found on YouTube, measuring the vortex ratio. We can see it's got a medium to high, very high breaking intensity, offering multiple barrel and tube sections. It's analogous to Kira, Off the Wall, Bingin, Manu Bay, and Whangamata. Those last two in New Zealand are protected because they're the best. They should be doing the same here. This combination of wave shape and peel angle means it's really conducive to high performance. It also had lengths of the ride more than 200 meters. Ultimately, we're saying this is a very valuable resource. It's not a second-rate surf break. This is some of the best in the country. So I provided a letter to Save Our Waves Maldives, who work with Save the Waves based in America, to explain the shortcomings. I've got lots there. I wouldn't have enough room on 10 slides to tell you what was wrong with the environmental impact assessment that the government put together. It was just completely flawed. So I write the letter, and the idea is that gets shared with someone that will listen, with a recommendation that they just need to go through a proper design process. Again, it's not about saying you can't do this. It's more about let's do it, and it works for you, and it works for the surf. No one's really listening except a young lad who lives there. His name's Yaman. He's a budding environmental scientist, a surf scientist, and we've worked together to start numerically modeling that to show the impact. That's the bathymetry, the sea floor on the left. As it is now, the waves wrapping around the corner here and in. There's actually a surf break on the other side as well. And then this simulation with a reclamation in place, and you can see how it disrupts the waves. They get all fuzzy. It is even affecting the waves on the other side of the channel. He texted me yesterday saying they're now going ahead with this. They are starting. It's not even contestable. You can't stop them. They're going ahead. We need to do something. We need to raise awareness. So hopefully there's a campaign around that. That's not my area, but it's happening. This is live. That's the end of my case studies for today. I've so many that I could just stay up here all day and talk about the case studies. These are the ones in New Zealand, all the ones in New Zealand that I know of. The ones in red are since we've had our legislation, our policy in place to protect our surf breaks. So even though we have the best management framework in the entire world, we're still dealing with issues, like constantly, consistently. And that was the impetus to start developing a set of management guidelines for surfing resources. The idea that people just need guidance on how to do this. It doesn't come intuitively to most people that work in government or in large engineering firms. They don't go, oh, what about the surf break? They don't think like that. But if you have a document that is a go-to document, they can learn about what it is they need to do to just smooth the process about, and so everyone's on the same page. And inside the document, we've got a number of steps that are easy to follow for the government or for a proponent, those wishing to do activity. Starting with identifying and characterizing surf breaks, building surf corridors, a threat and risk assessment. We made this based on surfing terminology, on how you can determine what the impact might be. And then how to establish proper modeling, proper baseline monitoring, so that you know what's there in the first place. This is a little video. This is what we did for Manu Bay. This is Waikeri, my moana, in New Zealand. And we developed an AI that would track the break point and then calculate the peel angle. The image on the bottom right is 3 years' worth of data of peel angle. So every single break point recorded through time. It's a bit fuzzy where I'm standing. Maybe you can see it. So we have a baseline of what's there in the first place. Why do we need a baseline? So that if someone comes along and says, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that, I'm going to mine some sand or build a new breakwater, well, you can't change it from that. That's the baseline, the environmental baseline. Really important. And that was the foundation of my PhD, which took 7 years of part-time hard work, the development of tools and guidelines for surfing resource management. And it's kind of the end of my story. Well, not the end of my story. It's the end of the story today. But I just have a few final notes to say on that. Ooh, if I can just get to that bit. If I look back across everything I've described, and I spent a lot of time thinking about this, that time at university, where I was based in Southampton, not surfing, it was incredibly hard, and I put myself under a lot of pressure. Immense pressure, actually. Coursework, dissertation, deadlines, and I did actually become quite overwhelmed. And I mean, I was really struggling with my mental health. And asking for help, and I mean counseling, was the hardest thing that I've ever done. PhD, piece of piss. Masters, it was hard, but actually asking for help was really hard for me. And I didn't know I'd include this part until I started writing it, until I started writing what I wanted to say today. And it's the first time I've ever shared that piece of information. The only person that's ever known that is Ash, my partner. But I had to include it. Once I got to it, now, I'm not being profound. I think there's great discussion around mental health these days, but as a father of 3 kids, I think it's really important that you don't have to be the best, which is what I was trying to be at university. You can be vulnerable, but people will be willing to help you and help you succeed if you let them. One thing, though, is that if you surf, you've got to keep doing it. Because looking back and not being able to surf, not being able to unleash, was really a big factor for me, so must keep surfing. The great Mark Occhilupo said something along the lines of, if you're a surfer and you're not surfing great waves, then you're wasting your life. Like many, probably in this room, I have been completely surf-hijacked. My hobbit-like country boy life was taken over by surf. It has taken me places physically, and it's pushed me mentally. From dropout to environmental scientist, surfing put me here today. Kia ora. Thank you.